Okay, there we go. Wonderful. Thank you, Mary. Appreciate it. Both Marys helping us out today. Okay, let's recite this together. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all three ever devout homage, to all worthy of respect, bowing with bodies as many as all realms atoms in all aspects, with supreme faith, I pay homage. Then we recollect the core teachings of Buddhism in this next verse, and then reflect on the transitory and empty nature of phenomena with one that immediately follows on the screen. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions. Perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha, a star, a visual aberration, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud. See conditioned things as such. Through these merits may sentient beings attain the rank of all-seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. We do the short mandala offering, imagining the entire phenomenal world transformed into a beautiful paradise, everything eternally kind of beautiful and pure. And we're making this vast offering to the refuge field, to the Buddha, all of our gurus, all these holy beings, to receive their blessings so we can, again, become just like them. So let's just recite this in English. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, four continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. O holy and perfect pure Lama, from the clouds of compassion that form in the skies of your Dharmakaya wisdom, please release a rain of vast and profound Dharma, precisely in accordance with the needs of those to be trained. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. And then taking refuge and generating bodhicitta. Again, we'll do this once in English, twice in Tibetan, recalling the nature of this mind of refuge, finding safe direction in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, especially the Dharma, the teachings that we are learning and practicing. And then the last two lines where we generate the best motivation for being here, thinking that we're here to accomplish Buddhahood ourselves so we can then help others to do the same. So it's again, once in English, twice in the Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chanyen gi pe sanam gi jola penchir sangye drupar shok. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi Daki Chenyen Gipe Sanam Gi Dola Penchir Sangye Drupar Shog. Okay, then let's go ahead and do a short meditation. Thank you, Mary, for having those prayers up. I'm going to just again do a few minutes of meditation on the breath as we usually do, give ourselves an opportunity to focus the mind a bit. And then after that, I'll lead you in a short reflection to generate a good motivation. And today we're going to do this by looking at the topic of gratitude. We just had this holiday of Thanksgiving, and we'll just use gratitude as an impetus for us to generate the motivation of bodhicitta. So again, just spend the first few minutes meditating on the breath, whatever way is suitable to your mind, trying to keep the mind with the breath whenever the mind wanders, and we see that that's happened, then bring the mind back to the breath. So I'll ring the chime to begin the meditation. So now let's set our motivation. And as I mentioned earlier, we're going to do this by cultivating a mind of gratitude. Let's start with what is easiest to be most grateful for, which are the people in our lives that help us quite directly. You can even think of this community, although we're all online in this virtual space. It's due to this community that we have access to these teachings, access to the Buddha Dharma. Can feel gratitude for those who are close in your life in terms of this Sangha, this community, but also the beings who are involved in your life every day. Partners, children, parents, pets, all those beings who bring you joy, who help with your welfare, taking care of you at times, contributing in various ways to your well-being. Just feel immense gratitude in your heart, a real appreciation for all those beings that make it possible for you to have the happiness you do have in your life, as well as, again, the access to the Dharma, which is the means for attaining the greatest happiness. Just feel really blessed to have this. And then to expand our awareness a bit more to those who are indirectly involved in our welfare. There are so many people that contribute to your welfare without you even knowing them. The food that you eat, although some of it you may have grown yourself over the summer months, what have you, no doubt most of it was obtained through the kindness of others. People going to work every day, harvesting fruit and vegetables, packaging food, distributing food, selling food, sometimes even preparing food for us. That's just food, which is an essential part of our day-to-day living. But we also need so many other things in our lives. And we can be grateful for all the beings who are behind the scenes, who contribute to your welfare in those ways. So feel gratitude for these beings. We don't know them necessarily, but we benefit from their actions. How wonderful that they do this, especially during these times when many people aren't capable of working. They continue to work to provide us with what we need. And we can expand our feeling of gratitude in the way that we've been exploring already in this course, looking at the perfection of patience and how much we can be grateful in the end, if we are willing to go to that place, for those people who are difficult in our lives, those people who harm us or those that we love, or who hold views that are antithetical to our own. These beings are an important part of our practice. We need the difficult people, the challenging people, in order to develop our patience, our compassion, our love, all of our qualities, to take them to a greater degree. While we're not condoning in any way the things that they do, since we're the recipient of those actions, we can use it in a positive way. And in this way, we can be grateful that we have those thorns in our side, those things that challenge us, that cause us to examine things more closely and develop the Dharma more deeply. So try to extend even gratitude for those beings. And as Lama Zopa Rinpoche says, we should be grateful for all beings, because all beings are actually the support of your greatest development. When we cultivate this mind of bodhicitta that is our motivation for being here, we're doing it on the basis of each and every single sentient being. As Lama Zopa Rinpoche says, every being that you think about or encounter is the source of all your past, present, and future happiness. Because by having them as an object of our mind of bodhicitta, as well as all of our other virtuous actions, we are able to achieve our greatest welfare, our greatest happiness. So feel grateful to have all of these beings. There's no being that we cannot feel some level of appreciation or gratitude towards. So resting in this place of extreme gratitude, just a heart full of gratefulness, generate a wish to repay all of this kindness that we've received, to do what you can to help all of these beings without exception to attain their greatest potential. And along with that, the recognition that we can't possibly do that until we've developed ourselves fully, until we've transcended our limitations, achieved the perfect state of Buddhahood through practicing these 6 perfections that we're studying in this course. So in this way, set this motivation of bodhicitta, striving to become a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings. In this way, what we do here today becomes the cause for that eventual result. Okay, I need to do just one quick little thing here before we get started. Mary's back with us. I've got to find her little box here. There it is. Okay. So, all right. I'm changing the host to Mary now. And then, of course, I still need to, can I still do the screen share? I think you have to enable me for screen share, though. All right, we'll do the screen share in a moment anyway. So welcome, everyone. Sorry, we've had a little bit of technical stuff today, but so today we're continuing our examination of patience. I think we'll finish with patience today, hopefully, and go on to the next perfection. Maybe not today, but at least by next Sunday. So again, we've been working with each of these 6 perfections. These are the ways in which we, as practitioners of the Mahayana, we might not be bodhisattvas yet. Again, to be a bodhisattva is already a pretty amazing accomplishment. It means that you have this mind of bodhicitta spontaneously. You don't even need to meditate on it. It just naturally comes to mind whenever we think of others, whenever we think about making our lives meaningful, and so on. So again, we're aspiring to this path of the bodhisattva, to achieving Buddhahood. The 6 perfections are the means for doing that, for accomplishing that. And recall that they are giving the name of the result to the cause. How do we become this perfect Buddha, this perfected state? How do we achieve that? Through practicing the perfections, the means of ripening our own minds, developing our own qualities. And recall how each of these are things we do develop internally. The perfection of giving, even though it manifests in external activity, is a perfection in our own minds, our strong intention to give. The perfection of ethics or morality, the same thing. It does manifest in how we act in the world and behave with others through our body and speech, but it begins with the mind, begins with our strong intention to abide in virtue. So this perfection of patience is exactly the same. It does manifest in our physical and verbal activities in the world around us, but it is developing an undisturbed mind, a mind that is not going to waver from that place of, strong uh, peace, calm, not be agitated by the harm others cause us, which is the first type of patience we looked at. It's not going to be agitated by the suffering we experience, which is what we looked at last Sunday. And even in the end, we're going to go to the 3rd level of patience today, where we examine how it's able to maintain this patient and certain determination to practice the Dharma and to engage in the Dharma fully. So again, there's 3 different levels of patience that we're discussing. Were there any questions or comments from last Sunday and our little investigation into that 2nd type, where again we have the patience that is willing and able to endure whatever suffering presents itself to us, because we have a lot of sufferings that aren't involved in other beings, just the complications of our daily world, samsara, all of the various things that we encounter, illness, aging, and so on. And we have to transform those into the path. We have to make those an opportunity for us to more fully examine teachings of the Dharma, for example, refuge, renunciation, developing compassion for others, and so on. Any questions or comments about that from anyone? So hopefully you had a chance to at least meditate on that a little bit, and or hopefully practice it over this past week. But this is, one that's really important, because we see that we're always together with some subtle level of dissatisfaction or suffering. We might have occasions where we feel, quite happy in our lives and what have you. But recall that, again, those are not really lasting. Those are not any real durable form of suffering. I'm sorry, of happiness. They are rather in the nature of suffering. So the idea is, again, that we have to see through all of our mistaken ideas about what we're engaged in and recognize that this is always an opportunity to practice anything we're encountering, though especially those things that are painful and challenging, really do give us an opportunity to open our hearts to the suffering of others, as well as to develop an understanding of these things, again, like renunciation, refuge, what have you. All right, then let's go ahead and go into the slides. Don't know, I may have actually put this on. Yeah, there we go. Okay. I was reviewing the slides earlier, and I think I even added a couple. And so were there any, I noticed that there's something in the chat box, but okay, there's no questions in the chat box. Okay, good. All right. These are, again, the 6 perfections. We're at the 3rd one. Again, we'll finish this hopefully today, go on to the remaining 3. The perfection of patience, recall that this is a virtuous mind that can remain indifferent to any form of harm inflicted by others. Again, the first type. The second type that we talked about last week can voluntarily endure any form of suffering. And the third, remain definitely thinking about the Dharma. This is an interesting one that we'll get into today, because you might not think of it in the category of patience because it's not quite the same as the patience we have in regard to harm or suffering. But it still is a mind that has the same type of quality to the mind of patience we've been discussing. So again, this is where we're going to go to today, the 3rd one, the patience of definitely thinking about the Dharma. This is described as the attitude willing to constantly listen to, think about, and meditate on the Dharma. So it's kind of interesting that this is put in this category, as I said earlier, because it's not something that we would normally think is akin to patience. But we do have this resistance frequently to practicing the Dharma that is sort of an internal enemy, if you will. We obviously do have a lot of other things in the next perfection. We're going to talk about the laziness that acts as an obstacle to our generating great perseverance and enthusiasm for our practice. But here the idea is that we need to have this certitude about the Dharma in terms of all the various teachings that we receive, so that we then are quite convinced that this is exactly what we need to engage in. We don't have any of that kind of resistance or impatience with regard to these teachings. Now, obviously, there are many teachings in the Buddha Dharma that are very difficult to comprehend, difficult for us to get our heads around, even difficult for us to generate some conviction in, because we can't always prove everything. I mean, a lot of the teachings of the Buddha are things that we can actually analyze and investigate and generate that certitude that comes from that type of reasoning. This is what we're looking at on Wednesday night in terms of the reasonings that are there for realizing emptiness. Emptiness is something that we obviously can explore and we can begin to gain a greater certitude towards. But the initial feelings that we have when we approach a topic like emptiness can often be in that flavor of impatience. We hear the words and the words sound very technical and the meaning sounds very obtuse, and we go, well, what is going on here? Do I really know? Do I have the ability to even understand this? And so we become impatient with the teachings frequently. But then we have the other teachings that we can't gain that type of certitude towards because we can't possibly completely analyze and know them. And these are things like karma and rebirth. Until we have much greater realizations, we're not going to be having any kind of direct knowledge of those topics. Instead, we have to work with them, as Venerable Rabina says, is more like working hypotheses. We have to actually live our lives according to those and see if we get the results that we are seeking. But nonetheless, it takes a lot to get us into the ballpark of having some conviction in those teachings. So what we're talking about here in regard to this type of patience is the ability for us to stay with our practice and study of the Dharma, to go through those obstacles in a sense so that we don't become discouraged and leave the Dharma, that we have a continuity of our practice and so on. So this one is kind of an interesting one. As I said, it sort of feeds into the next one when we talk about the joyous enthusiasm that we can have for our practice. That next perfection builds on that idea that it starts with our awareness of Dharma, but then we have to wholeheartedly engage in it. And there we have to look at the other obstacles that arise in relation to that. So what I'd like to do is share a few other screens that have a few slides that have some words from Rinpoche and then also from Geshe Sopa, because I like the way he approached it in his commentary on Tsongkhapa's great treatise, The Stages of the Path. So this is, again, the book that I've been quoting from frequently. I like to bring in Rinpoche, him being the spiritual director for the FPMT and therefore for Thupten Norbu Ling. So he says in his book that was published earlier this year, The Six Perfections, the third type of patience is the patience of gaining certainty about the Dharma. We do this by meditating on and understanding the meaning of the Lam Rim, the stages of the path, and understanding and appreciating the extraordinary qualities of the three rare sublime ones. These are the three jewels, as they're often called, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Again, we saw those in our prayer that we recited at the beginning today, that we take refuge in. So this is one of the aspects of this type of patience, this gaining certainty about the qualities of the three jewels. He also goes on to say, being convinced of the crucial importance of attaining enlightenment. This is also a topic for bodhisattvas to meditate on and gain certainty about. And having certainty about the effectiveness of the path that leads there. Of course, he's skipping a number of topics here. He's just highlighting a few of them. We're going to look at the full list of 8 topics that we are encouraged to gain certainty about in a moment. But he essentially is pointing out that this is what this patience means, is the patience that's willing to engage in what it takes to gain this type of certainty, to develop this type of certainty, rather than becoming impatient and frustrated and thinking, again, that this is not something we're going to continue to pursue. Then we have to have that willingness to be with the difficulties through the path. When we have all these qualities, we will never lack the patience to persevere with our Dharma practice, Rinpoche says. So then again, I've got a few quotes that I thought were really quite nice from Geshe Sopa's book. This is the 3rd volume of his 5 volumes of commentary on the Lam Rim Chenmo, the great treatise. So know that, again, this is one of Lama Zopa's teachers. Geshe Sopa passed away a few years back, but Lama Zopa would go up there frequently for his summer teachings. Geshe Sherab had gone to a number of the summer teachings as well, I believe, with Geshe Sopa. Of course, he would go up there when his teacher, the Ganden Tripa, was there these last few times. So he says there in his book, the 3rd type of patience is mental clarity about reality. It is understanding causation. When we do not know something, we have doubts about it. That makes us feel negative. Not liking a practice, not wanting to do a practice, or even if we do it, feeling uncomfortable and having reservations about the practice are all aspects of impatience. So this is how he describes this impatience that we're trying to battle here with this patience of certitude about the Dharma, is that we're not quite there. We're not fully engaged, fully committed. That we feel that we don't have the understanding and the level of awareness to get us in the ballpark completely. And maybe some of us aren't even dealing with this impatience that's being described here, and that's okay. If we are, aren't dealing with it, then that's wonderful. Congratulate yourself at having overcome that. But I would still say that most of us probably have some subtle level of this that keeps us from getting on our cushion or keeps us from doing things fully, is because we just simply don't have the full level of study and understanding to enforce that type of certitude. So he says then, in order for religious practitioners to be comfortable and inspired to practice, they must understand the causes, the nature, and the results of each practice. So in this context, mental clarity means faith, or we could say a trust without any negative reservations, or you could even call it a pure motivation for doing a practice. Patience is using wisdom to see the reality of Dharma. So I'll talk about faith in a moment. Let me finish his quote here. He says, this then enables us to hold religious practices in a positive light. We will admire them, like them, and become able to do them. So this is the whole import of this type of patience, is that it causes us to be drawn then towards our practice of the Dharma. Of course, this whole course on the 6 perfections could be in this category of developing this patience of certitude around the Dharma. We're looking in particular at the 6 perfections, trying to understand them, trying to develop some conviction in their power to help us to move our minds in the direction of enlightenment and so on. So when we have that kind of initial resistance that is, I'm not so sure I want to engage in this, patience at this level, well, then we need to study more. We need to understand all the incredible benefits of patience, all the detrimental effects of our anger, and so on. And then we can have a greater conviction in that. And what Rinpoche, or I'm sorry, what Lama or Geshe Sopa was calling faith. So faith in Buddhism is never really a blind faith. Even when we talk about faith in the law of cause and effect, karma, as I mentioned earlier, karma is not a topic that we can prove to anyone. I can't go up to somebody and say, oh, the reason why this good thing just happened to you or this bad thing just happened to you is because 5 lifetimes ago you did this or that, and that's ripening now. Even if I were to say that to somebody, how would I prove that? How can I possibly prove that people's actions of the past in this lifetime or other lifetimes are causing them to have experiences in the moment, in the present? This is not something that I can easily prove to others. So with regard to those topics, again, I do have to have some level of faith, but the faith isn't blind faith. Faith is investigating it to see whether this system that we're going to use as our working hypothesis holds water, whether it does have some logic to it. And in my estimation, karma is one that we can investigate and find that type of certitude, even though we can't prove it to anyone, even though we can't even prove it to ourselves. We can understand that it makes sense that causality is functioning. Remember that Geshe Sopa was saying that that's really what we're gaining certitude about is causation. Causation at the level of studying karma, but causation as it unfolds throughout our entire path. The Buddha set this goal of enlightenment, or the lower goal of liberation, attaining one's own nirvana. He set these goals out for us, even the goal of the temporary goal of gaining a good rebirth, as a means for us to generate greater well-being for ourselves and others. And he set out an entire path to do that. These things that they don't just arise on a whim. It's not that people instantly achieve nirvana just by, looking at something or, having this experience that doesn't have any causes or conditions behind it. There's causation involved in everything that we do in our path, whether we talk about the initial level of getting a good rebirth, whether we talk about attaining liberation, whether we talk about attaining enlightenment or Buddhahood as we are in this course. There are causes for achieving that. We have to develop that sincere certainty, a real commitment and dedication to our practice of everything that leads us there, by really having conviction that causation is the process by which that occurs. So if we develop an understanding of all the causes that lead, which essentially is what the Lam Rim is, right? This is why Rinpoche said it means we have to fully engage in the Lam Rim. The Lam Rim is a manual for causing us to become a Buddha, by practicing various things that develop our minds in various ways that eventually result in our attainment of that state. It's kind of a whole roadmap for us to be able to achieve that, thoroughly grounded in the concept of causation. Without it, these causes, we could never attain Buddhahood, and so on. So this is what we're talking about here, is a patience that is willing to go to those places of generating that type of certitude, because then we will feel enthusiastic about our practice. We will admire what we are doing. We will like what we're doing. And again, as I said, some of you may have already gotten through some of your own obstacles around that. I know that when people initially come into the Dharma, there's a lot of enthusiasm sometimes because they're hearing things that are really resonating with them, but there can also be this type of impatience. People really not feeling fully behind everything because they haven't yet developed that level of conviction. So faith in Buddhism, and what we're talking about here, this mental clarity that Geshe Sopa was saying, is the essence of this mind of patience that we're developing at this third level. This mental clarity is a faith that is developed through our own conviction in the Dharma. Faith in Buddhism, as I said, is not a blind faith. It actually involves 3 different levels. The first level is where we actually gain some clarity about these teachings. This is often called lucid faith or clear faith. And then, for example, with regard to the one topic that is going to be the first one on the list that Rinpoche was speaking about in his commentary, he said that it's generating faith in the qualities of the 3 jewels. So we investigate, we study, and we get to know, what are the three jewels? What does it mean to be a Buddha? What are the qualities of a Buddha? What does it mean to be the Dharma jewel? And what are the qualities of that? And so on. We look at each of these and we understand all the various causes and conditions that lead them to be the three jewels for us, these three precious objects that we take refuge in. That's the first level of our faith. It's just gaining clarity with regard to that. The second level of our faith is where we actually aspire to practice the Dharma, to become like the Buddha, to attain realizations like the Sangha. We actually see that it's possible for us to move in the same direction. Again, the Buddha is not some omnipotent being, often, some netherworld that is controlling everything. The Buddha was a being just like us. We all can develop our minds to that same degree. So the second level of faith is this aspiring faith, this longing faith that wants to move in the same direction that the three jewels are encouraging us to move in. Well, then the third level of faith is this faith of conviction that arises when we begin to taste the Dharma and its effects in our own lives, which of course means that we do have to practice. We do have to gain all that previous understanding so that we start to see that the Dharma is a workable tool in our lives, and it does lead us to the results that we seek. For example, just, again, let's move away from the three jewels as an object of investigation. Look at just these teachings on patience. For the last few Sundays, we've been examining this idea of how we cultivate this undisturbed mind in the face of harm being caused by others, suffering that we have to experience. Well, you get an understanding of those as I went through all the various lists of all the reasonings and things that we can apply, and you begin to apply those in your life because you've already developed some clear faith that understands those things that we need to practice to gain that. You've developed some aspiration to move in that direction, hopefully, desire to be that patient, to have this undisturbed mind. And then you actually gain some greater faith by applying these teachings in your daily life. Maybe at your Thanksgiving gathering, if you did have one, or in just your day-to-day life with others and what have you in the world. And you begin to taste what it's like to be patient. You begin to understand that those causes and conditions lead to that result. And then you have even greater faith in it, right? Because you're convinced at that point that the teachings work, that the teachings actually lead to the result that they advertise. And then you have even greater enthusiasm again and admiration of the practices and so on. That's kind of the beginning point for our development of all of this kind of aspiration and effort and everything else that's involved in our path. As I said, the next perfection kind of takes off from this and talks about how do we even have greater perseverance and enthusiasm for our practice. Well, if we haven't dealt with this level of patience and developed this in our minds, then we won't have that great enthusiasm. It does entail some level of faith. We'll talk about that when we get to joyous effort and that next perfection. So let's take a look at the uh, other practices that are involved in this, kind of a more deeper explanation of what this entails. This is also on the little chart that I put together. Again, that is a handout that should be out there on the that you should be able to access on the materials link. And again, it's a Dropbox location, but you don't have to have Dropbox account to get all those things. You can just simply click on them and then download them from there. But essentially, this is one of the sections of the chart that described each of these three types of patients. And this one, again, is for the patients of definitely thinking about the Dharma. There's a further explanation. 8 aspects are traditionally given as the objects of definitely thinking about the Dharma. So this actually is coming from the Lamrim Chenmo Tsongkhapa's presentation of this. The very first one are those objects of faith, the objects that we are taking refuge in, that we're finding safe direction in, which are essentially meaning that we need to have conviction, this faith that is convinced about the qualities of the three jewels, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. we begin to see, again, through our own investigation, that it makes sense that when they practice the Dharma to that degree, they attain the state of the Sangha jewel, the Dharma itself being, the teachings that are given to us, as well as the realizations in the minds of those beings who practice them, the Buddha being the omniscient being who, through his own investigation, came to discern the truth of the Dharma and then shares that Dharma with us so we can progress on the path as Sangha and so on. So again, we gain conviction of that and practice patience towards that by examining the qualities of the three jewels, analyzing them, coming to develop a deeper understanding of them. The next two are the objects to be cultivated, which are the two selflessnesses. Again, this is where we do get into the topic of emptiness I mentioned earlier. The two selflessnesses is referring to the emptiness or selflessness of persons and the emptiness or selflessness of phenomena other than persons. It's usually just called emptiness of phenomena, but obviously a person is a phenomenon. It's just that we have two different ways of approaching our realization of emptiness. The initial one that we're encouraged to practice is to examine emptiness with regard to ourselves, to understand the deepest truth about ourselves and our status of being before we go on to then look at other phenomena. But nonetheless, these two are practiced, together to some degree, and they entail a similar type of investigation and understanding. So we definitely can have some impatience towards these objects to be cultivated because these are quite complex. On Wednesday night in the class, there, the bit more advanced class we're getting into the complexities of understanding these and how difficult it is and how we can have that resistance, that lack of wholehearted engagement in the teachings on selflessness. The desired object, the third one, which are the powers of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And I'm not going to go into the full list. Of course, there are said to be these 10 powers of a Buddha that entail all these various things that are in the omniscient mind of a Buddha. And then a Buddha, of course, has the ability through the compassion that they've developed as well as the power that they possess to manifest in a variety of ways for sentient beings, in whatever way is suitable to their karma. Buddhists have amazing powers and abilities, and even bodhisattvas, as they develop their minds, beginning with their initial realization of emptiness at a direct level, all the way through the various grounds, the 10 grounds, they develop, unbelievable powers and qualities. Well, we have to study these and investigate these so we have some conviction in those and we don't have an impatience towards hearing those things, towards having deeper understanding. So again, it's a similar type of thing. I'm not going to spend as much time on all of these because, again, I don't know that we absolutely need to. The work that we need to do is to actually do our own Lamrim study and investigation through coming to teachings like this, as well as spending time with Tsongkhapa's great treatise, the commentaries I mentioned by Geshe Sopa, and so on. The fourth and the fifth are a pair. These are what we learn at the very beginning of our path, right? In the small scope, the person of the least capacity, where we look at how we have to adopt virtuous deeds and understand the results that will arise from that, and discard the non-virtuous deeds, understanding that they lead to suffering results. Again, this is not something that we can have direct knowledge of necessarily, but we can gain greater conviction through our own investigation, through not letting that impatience or that resistance keep us from investigating that topic. Now, again, when I teach beginning students, I'm frequently telling people about the shelf, right? Many of you heard the shelf before, and many teachers use this idea. When people come in and they're brand new to the Dharma, they hear topics like karma and rebirth and what have you, and they can't necessarily get their minds around it because these are not things we are raised with. In Asia, where they have parents who are practicing these sorts of teachings, and children are raised with the understanding of karma. But in our culture, we're not raised with the understanding of karma, nor of rebirth for that matter. So these are foreign concepts. So certainly, when you begin your Dharma practice, it is perfectly fine to have a shelf that we can put these topics and we can say, okay, I'm not really ready to investigate that yet. You might have some of that impatience of not willing to kind of go to those things yet, but that's okay because you're new to the Dharma. And so I always give beginning students, even through a good portion of our beginning Dharma career, you've got permission to put things on the shelf. Leave them on the shelf as long as you wish. Take them down when you wish to investigate them again. And sometimes you take them down and you go, no, I'm not really ready for that yet. And you put it back on the shelf. Nothing wrong with that approach. that's kind of how we get into the Dharma initially, is rather than trying to get our minds around everything, the entire Lam Rim and everything that's involved in it, and feel like we have to generate conviction right from the get-go and all of that. Rather, start with those teachings that resonate for you, that are much easier for you to investigate and to gain conviction of. And once you've generated that, then over time, you may be ready to take down those topics that are more difficult. And you can gain the same sort of certitude about those once you have investigated other teachings. And this is a perfectly fine path. There's nothing wrong with that at all. The next topics in terms of these 8 that we gain certitude about are the object of meditation, that is the goal to be achieved, and its companion, which is the object of meditation, that is the method to achieve that goal. So these in the Bodhisattva path, of course, because we're talking about the perfections here, involve enlightenment, Buddhahood, as the object, that is the goal to be achieved. So we need to gain certitude about that goal. What is entailed in that goal? What does it mean to, possess the state of enlightenment, to be a Buddha, and so on? And then we also have to have conviction in the method, all the paths of training in the mind of enlightenment, the bodhicitta, the practices that follow, the bodhisattva, which again is what we're doing in this course. This course is talking about the method for becoming enlightened, the things we need to engage in to perfect our own minds. So this is, again, things that we need to not have that resistance towards, wholeheartedly embrace these things and become more enamored of these practices. And this is, again, why we're doing this course, is to help us to move out of our comfort zone in terms of our practices of generosity, ethics, patience, and so on. The last of these 8 is called the objects of training subsequent to study and reflection, which are the topics that are to be known in the Buddha Dharma. They could even include in this almost everything else that is in the corpus of what the Buddha taught. But this is topics such as impermanence and so forth. I think when Rinpoche just talks about how we need to just have a greater awareness and understanding of the Dharma, this is really what we mean, that we have to be willing to engage in whatever topics the Buddha set out and develop our study of those, our meditation on those. So again, this whole third level of patience is really about generating this conviction, this definite decision to engage in these teachings, and to not let us get kind of held back by any of this sort of resistance that can arise in our minds. As I said, for most of us, we can recall times earlier in our Dharma career where that was a major factor, but I would still encourage you to take a look and see whether this is something that's playing a role in your Dharma practice right now. Do you need to do further study, investigation, analysis to gain greater conviction in things so that you can more wholeheartedly engage in those practices? And for some of you, again, that may be something to then pay attention to and to make like your New Year's resolution in a month or so, that you're going to do that to really look at a particular topic where you can see that you've got that type of impatience. So let me see if I notice there's some things in the chat box. No, no questions or comments. Anyone have anything that they'd like to share in regard to this topic? See if I can see everybody's little box. Anyone? So again, this third one is a little bit different. We don't think of this normally as impatience or certainly anger. I mean, I suppose some people could have anger at the Dharma. Somebody's explaining emptiness to them for the first time, and all they do is get angry. What are you talking about? This has got to be the most craziest thing I've ever heard, or blah 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 blah. I assume some people can have that kind of reaction. But here we're talking about sort of maybe, again, a different way that we approach the whole topic of patience. We understand that there can be a subtler level of this that kind of is an obstacle, something we need to get through in order to be more fully engaged in the Dharma teachings. Let's go ahead and finish off the chart then. There were a few other things. Again, I've been doing this for each of these perfections, is to show how do we make these practices even purer and of greater quality. And I think this is an important part of this for each of these, is to say, what do we do to enhance our practice of patience in this case? to make it provide the best results for ourselves and others. This is kind of the minimum, are these three, what are called the three supreme qualities. As people, again, who are aspiring on the Mahayana, we should be doing what we can to apply these three to our practice of patience. So the first one, supreme reliance, means to rely on bodhicitta purely as your motivation for practicing patience. So even with regard to that last one that we looked at, this is why we engage in our further investigation and study of the Dharma and so on, to gain greater certitude about it, is because we want to become a Buddha for the sake of others. This is also why we don't retaliate at those who cause harm to us. This is also why we don't get upset and angry and lash out at others when we get sick or, lose our job or whatever, life sufferings befall us. So we have to, again, practice it all with bodhicitta, all with the aim that we are going to use our practice of patience as a means to become enlightened for the sake of others. Supreme method. This means that when we practice patience, conjoin it with our wisdom perceiving emptiness, the emptiness of the three spheres, as they are often called, or three circles. These are what are involved in any particular action. You always have an object of your action that action is kind of directed towards. In this case, the object of patience, which, for example, if someone's harming you, it would be, the person who is saying negative things to you, for example. Well, they would be the object of your patience. You want to recall that they are not inherently existent, that they don't exist on their own independently. The act of patience, what is being cultivated in your own mind, that undisturbed quality that is not allowing you to go to the place of anger, that's also empty of inherent existence. The practitioner of patience, you yourself, we're different than the action and certainly different than the object. You yourself are empty of inherent existence. So again, we try to apply the wisdom realizing emptiness to our practice of patience. Now again, it's a lot to incorporate all these things. You got your bodhicitta there, you've got your wisdom of emptiness there, you even have a dedication, the third of these, but you just do your best to try to bring those to mind when you can, even after the fact. It's perfectly fine to go back and look at it and try to apply an understanding. Now, again, why do we apply the supreme method in all of these? Because that is the final way that we are able to fully perfect our minds, is by realizing emptiness and developing that wisdom. We'll get to that when we get to the perfection of wisdom, the sixth perfection. But supreme dedication, of course, dedication is a key part of the Bodhisattva path as well. We have to dedicate all the virtues that arise from our own practice of patience to the attainment of enlightenment, to the goal that we are striving to achieve. So these are the first three of these supreme qualities that are set out for us to try to practice with. I think a lot of people forget to dedicate. I even find myself at times, as much as I try to remember it, it doesn't oftentimes immediately come to mind. And we'll do something, we'll work with our minds to some even minor degree and just go on to the next thing and not stop and think about dedicating. I think a good practice to get into at the end of your day, when you do all of your purification or whatever it is that you close your day with, certainly rejoice in all the good things that you've done. That's one key part of our evening meditation. But also recite a verse of dedication for all those things that you perhaps forgot to dedicate. The little things that you did, even like feeding your pet. Feeding your pet is an act of generosity, as we talked about previously. It's giving material goods to another being. It's that type of generosity. It's even also, you can rejoice that you're protecting your animals. Here we are now in the winter. I just out feeding the birds this morning and heard one of the cats in the neighborhood that is really awful to hear that it's out there. It makes this really kind of mournful cry. And it's somebody's cat that doesn't have a home. That just is left outside, doesn't have a nice warm place to go into at night, and we're getting into those temperatures where it can be really dangerous for animals to be out in the cold. So certainly, that's another way that you're offering generosity of protection, protecting from danger to your pets. Dedicate that at the end of your day, that you gave them a nice, warm, safe place to be every day. There are lots of things that we forget to dedicate. So try to, at the end of your day at least, reflect on the day and say, wow, all the good things that I did, all the ways that I contributed to the welfare of others, even in the subtlest ways. I need to dedicate that. I need to put that in my store of stuff for enlightenment. Recall that this whole concept of dedication, they often use the example of like if you had a pail of water and we were trying to fill it up, it's like putting another drop of water in the bucket. Well, the bucket gets full by each and every drop. That's how a bucket gets full. A bucket doesn't get full by, just magically. It has to do with each drop that enters into it. If you have a bucket out in the rain, right, it's, every single drop contributing to it eventually getting to the rim and overflowing. Well, if we want to get to the state of enlightenment, we have to think about each of those individual drops and dedicate them for that cause. Dedication is the way that we actually seal that and make sure that it is going to be given to that result. And in this way, it causes unbelievable increase of that, because when we attain the state of Buddhahood, it's not something that we have for just a day or so. It's something you have eternally. You will be a Buddha for all time, contributing to the welfare of all beings for all time. So in that way, dedication is a very important part of increasing that merit and making sure that it stays very safe and secure and brings forth the result that we seek. So again, this is one way to think about it and to be encouraged to practice dedication. So we're just at about 11 o'clock. Let me see. There is a question, maybe I'll deal with that, and then we'll go to have our break. I suppose part of patience with the Dharma could be patience with oneself. I think so. Amanda asked this, and I think there is that, being willing to understand that we do have obstacles sometimes to understanding things, engaging in things. When we talk about the topic of selflessness or emptiness, this is obviously so for most of us. It's the rare person who comes in the room who immediately gets emptiness, right? I don't even know if I've seen anybody like that. I certainly wasn't like that, so each of us come into this topic and we can feel sometimes like we're squeezing our head, like squeezing our mind, like we don't, it's not very comfortable because we're talking about topics that are new to us, using language that is new to us, using all these various terms and what have you, and trying to understand how to investigate and analyze and get to some idea of what emptiness is. And it can be really frustrating. It can be like an impatience we have towards ourselves, towards our inability to quickly understand. But this is the reality of a lot of topics of the Dharma. It takes repeated exposure and investigation day by day over not just this life, but probably lifetimes to realize a lot of what, happens in the Dharma. So be patient with yourself in regard to that. I think this fits perfectly into this category, this third one, where we just are simply not as willing to give ourselves the space to be okay with not immediately understanding, not immediately getting it. We have to, be willing to do a bit more to get to that place. So thank you for that question, Amanda. So let's take a 10-minute break. So again, I had 11:01 on my screen. Okay, good. Welcome back, everyone. So let me do one check-in one more time just to see if there were any other questions or comments that people had about what we talked about so far, our practice of patience, especially any of these three types. I think maybe you've all perfected patience already. um, um, No, I think it's perfectly fine, Amanda. The question that Amanda put in the box as well is, when do we use capital letters for these three jewels, for example, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha? Because sometimes, yeah, you will see them not capitalized, sometimes capitalized. When we're referring to the historical Buddha, that's when we would usually use Buddha capitalized. Buddha itself, it wouldn't be capitalized as like to attain the state of Buddhahood or to become a Buddha, because the idea is that sort of just like the same category as a sentient being or what have you. It's not really an honorific per se. But when we talk about the historical Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, that would be where we capitalize it. Dharma, usually again, when we refer to the Dharma jewel, there are some times when we don't capitalize Dharma, but I don't know that, again, I tend to capitalize it most of the times when I talk about the Dharma. because in that way it's kind of referring to the Dharma jewel, the Dharma that we study, and so on. Um, there are contexts where it isn't like the 8 worldly dharmas. Dharma is a word that essentially can refer to all phenomena, and so in those cases it's sort of like the phenomena that are more worldly, and so in that case you wouldn't capitalize the D in Dharma. So I capitalize it whenever I'm referring to kind of, yeah, the Dharma jewel, the Dharma of the Buddha, the Dharma teachings, and so on. Those sorts of things I would capitalize it. Sangha, Sangha, again, that would probably be very similar, mostly in the context of talking about the jewel of Sangha. It's maybe not capitalized quite as often, but even I notice in the prayers when we say Supreme Assembly, that's another way of translating what the Tibetan word for Sangha is, Gedun, is to say the Supreme Assembly, and they capitalize it there. So again, when we talk about it as an object of refuge in terms of the 3 jewels and what have you, would be capitalized. Sangha, I don't know, when we say ordained Sangha, I think generally we don't capitalize the S in Sangha. That's my experience now that I'm thinking about it. I have to be looking at some materials from FPMT to see what they say. Because when we use it in a more conventional sense, we're referring to the Sangha that are the ordained folks. When we use it in an even broader conventional sense, then it includes all of us, that we would mean as a spiritual community. And in those contexts, I think it's perfectly fine to not have it capitalized. So I guess the general rule is if it's referring to the 3 jewels and those beings or the Dharma jewel that encompass that, then we would be capitalizing it. But if not, then it doesn't need to be capitalized. I don't think there's any fault in capitalizing it in those cases. But anyone have any different advice on that? I don't know. I hadn't thought about it so much, but I have a natural way of doing it. Yeah, Doris.
Not advice, but I can confirm what you said because I had to get that information from Venerable Rubina recently. So yeah, that was right. Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good,
not
good to know that
not that I know much.
Good to know. Thank you, Doris. I appreciate that. It's good to know I'm in accord with Venerable Rabina. I try to stay in harmony with her as much as I can, but anyway. Thank you for that question. I know that, yeah, it is kind of confusing sometimes because you will see it, especially Buddha. You see it capitalized in some places. And then there are some people who I notice in some Dharma texts where they capitalize Buddhahood and capitalize Buddha anytime they use it, regardless of whether it's referring to the historical Buddha or not. So again, I don't think there's a huge fault, but it is probably more appropriate just to capitalize it when it refers to the 3 jewels. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Let's get back into things then. I talked about the 3 supreme qualities before the break. We get to add on 3 more qualities so that you can make it to the 6 supreme qualities and you can try to practice even fuller your practice of patience. Supreme reliance was as above, to rely on the mind of bodhicitta. Supreme object, we should have the level of patience itself being practiced at the highest possible standard. That is, be patient equally toward all living beings without exception. To try to take our level of patience to that degree, not to think that, oh, well, there's some people that are just so difficult that I won't ever be able to practice patience with regard to them. We want to try to hold the same quality of patience with regard to the most despicable, hateful person in the world, not going to that degree of becoming impatient with them and having hateful, angry thoughts towards them, but rather try to bring it to that level. So we're not all at that level immediately. That's perfectly fine. It's understandable, but we want to strive in that direction. Excuse me, supreme purpose. The supreme purpose for your practice of patience is to bring temporary and ultimate happiness to all other living beings. Of course, this is entailed within our motivation of bodhicitta, but we can hold that awareness that we are not just talking about the goal of them attaining Buddhahood, but everything that will lead to that, the temporary happiness they can have and good rebirths and so on, the ultimate happiness of liberation as well as enlightenment. Just having that purpose to bring sentient beings to that state. It means that we always are going to be in that space of thinking about the welfare of others because their attaining happiness is our goal, is what we are dedicated to. Supreme method was, as we talked about earlier, which was the emptiness of the 3 spheres. Recall that. Dedication, making sure we dedicate it for unsurpassed enlightenment for ourselves and all beings. And then supreme purity. Practice patience with an attitude, wishing to be free from the obstructions to liberation and the obstructions to omniscience or Buddhahood. So I know I've explained these before, but let me take a moment just to make sure people are clear, because that's a lot of words too, multi-syllabic words. Obstructions, we have two levels of obstructions. They say, well, there are actually a number of them that are talked about in the traditional texts, but the ones that we're talking about that are the main ones is the level first of being obstructed to attaining our liberation from all of our own delusions, which essentially are all of the afflictions, our ignorance, our anger, our greed, jealousy, all these various things, as well as, of course, all the karma that is created on the basis of those. All of those are what we call our afflictive obstructions, and then we even have seeds of those. Every time that you engage in a mind of anger, for example, you plant a seed for anger to arise again. It kind of strengthens the potential for anger to be there in your mind. So all of those seeds and the manifest states of those are all removed first. They are called the afflictive obstructions, the obstructions to liberation. They are what keep you from knowing the peace of nirvana, the peace that occurs when you have removed that level of obscuration in your mind. But then the bodhisattvas are intent upon removing the obstructions to omniscience or to Buddhahood. Those are much subtler obscurations. The analogy that they use for these is that the first one is like, say you've been keeping garlic in a clay pot. I actually used to do this when I lived in San Francisco, kind of ruined the pot. You put garlic into the pot and that clay pot will, pick up the smell of the garlic. So even when you remove the garlic, which is like removing the afflictive obscurations, the first level of obscurations, you smell the pot and the pot still has the stains of that. It has the imprints of that. The latencies of that is what you might call it even. Well, what the Buddha says is that we have these sort of stains on our minds that are caused by us having had ignorance since beginningless time. That has caused us to have these imprints that give rise to a false appearance. And we talked about this a little bit on Wednesday night in Wednesday night's class on emptiness. There are two factors involved in our problems. We are first adhering to things as existing inherently. This is what the wisdom of emptiness immediately overcomes or counteracts, is that strong adherence to things existing that way. But then they appear that way. Everything that appears to us is infused with that idea, that image, that even though we could call it an illusion, that they exist on their own independently, inherently. Again, I'm going into the emptiness teachings a little bit today even, but it's just to make this point that we have this subtler imprint that is causing this dualistic appearance, this false appearance of things to exist on their own. Even when we remove the garlic, the afflictive obscurations, you're still going to have that stain. That stain in the mind and that dualistic appearance is what keeps you from being a Buddha. So that's the main target of a bodhisattva's practice. But of course, they have to remove the garlic first before they can remove the stain of the garlic. And so that's the final stage of a bodhisattva's development, is to actually remove those. So when we talked about this supreme purity, we mean having this wish to remove not just our own afflictive obscurations that will allow us to attain our own nirvana, but to remove even the subtler obscurations to omniscience that will allow us to attain Buddhahood, because these both need to be removed in order for us to attain that goal. So that's the idea behind that. And again, I just wanted to make sure people were clear about what those are, because again, you may not have heard those terms before. Again, you will sometimes see the first one called afflictive obstructions or obscurations, and the second one being called knowledge obscurations. But they are referring to the same thing, the first level that are the afflictions of ignorance and so on that we need to remove initially. And then if we're headed for Buddhahood, we have to go on to remove these subtler knowledge obscurations. They keep us from having omniscience because they keep us in a dualistic awareness that is not allowing us to know all phenomena directly. So there is also a little bit of your chart that deals with these, how we make our practice kind of fuller by practicing all 6 perfections within each of them. So here we're going to look at how the 6 are practiced within patience. So the first one is, how do we be generous within our patience? While we're practicing patience, try to lead others into the practice of patience. I know this is really one of the hardest things. Tupten Chodron, the book that I think I have it on my shelf here. Let me get that down so I can show you. This is Working with Anger. I think I've referred to this book here and there throughout the teachings on patience, but if not, this is an excellent book if you want to kind of have a step-by-step sort of guide about how to work with these various ideas that we've talked about already here. She has one little chapter in here about helping others subdue their anger. But this is really hard, to help others to practice patience. And you see the importance of us practicing it well ourselves first in order to be able to help others. So the first step always is to work on our own minds so we know how to practice patience, so we aren't a bad example to others, and then try to guide others into the practice of it. But we can still have that wish, that intention, that by my being patient, especially if it's a group gathering, and you have various people around the table or whatever, and somebody's saying something that's really upsetting some other people. But if you're able to stay patient and calm and undisturbed in the midst of that, then how wonderful. You can be an example for the other people at the table, the other people who are involved, and have that intention behind your practice that you can give them the ability to be patient with life sufferings, with other people, what have you. So that is a way that we can practice generosity within our practice of patience. Ethics with patience. Be mindful not to break any vows while engaged in the practice of patience. Of course, we want to be mindful of our vows all the time, but within our practice of patience, it's important that we do hold our dedication to holding our vows purely, that becomes a part of that practice, so that we don't in some way break our vows in the midst of trying to be patient. I'm trying to think of an example for that. I really couldn't come up with one, but nonetheless, don't try to refrain from all the basic acts such as the 10 non-virtues and so on in your practice of patience, but be careful not to break any other vows that you might have. The third one, patience with patience. How do you practice patience within patience? Allow the tendencies you develop through the practice of patience to help you to practice patience continuously in the future. In other words, you kind of feed patience into the dedication of practicing it more and more, developing deeper and deeper patience. Joyous effort with patience. That's again the next perfection we're going to go on to. When practicing patience, do so with joy and energy, overcoming any laziness that's holding you back from practicing patience. Patience is a hard practice, so it does mean we have to put some joyous enthusiasm into it, practicing on the cushion and then practicing off the cushion when we encounter things in our life that are challenging. Concentration with patience, this is pretty much the same for all of these. While practicing patience in this case, keep your mind tranquil and undistracted as best as you can. Again, we don't have perfect concentration, most of us, so we have to, do the best that we can within that practice of patience. Wisdom with patience, use your faculty of analytical wisdom to discern how to practice patience skillfully and discriminate between correct and incorrect patience, and be aware of the sphere of emptiness of the three. This was what we saw earlier with Supreme Method, right? To have that awareness of the emptiness of the three spheres, the practitioner ourselves, the act of being patient, and the object of patience, all of them lacking inherent existence. So where it says here to discriminate between correct and incorrect patience, what I discern by that, and again, there's not a lot of commentary out there, is that we might be patient with certain things that we shouldn't be patient with. Sometimes we're patient with our own crazy minds, and we should be a little impatient with those in a sense. I mean, not as a delusion, not getting angry and upset at these things, but we have to have a strong fortitude and intolerance towards our delusions. When we see anger arising or attachment arising, jealousy arising, it's our job to be impatient with those, rather than being impatient with the things that externally and what have you. That's where we, would definitely want to not kind of allow those to just be in our minds. This is a good part of our work. Rinpoche is always emphasizing this. Really, Buddhism comes down to working with our minds 24/7. Well, we don't want to have patience with the delusions. The delusions are not a proper form of patience. They're an object to be patient with. We actually have to have great strength and will to overcome them, to apply antidotes when they arise, and so on. So again, the more correct forms of patience would be when we have patience towards those things that are harming us and on the outside that are going to normally cause us to get angry and upset. So they will cause the delusions to not arise. But if we have patience and allow the delusions to arise and be patient with them, well, then that wouldn't really be appropriate. So the last thing I'm going to cover with regard to patience that I hope I can finish today, I don't think I'll have a problem because these aren't really that horribly complicated. I've been adding on to this because this whole thing is about working with the practice of this. I've been adding on the secondary vows of the Bodhisattva vows. A number of you who are involved in the teaching today have taken the Bodhisattva vows formally from a preceptor like Geshe Sherab or Venerable Rabina or Lama Zopa, other teachers. So thereby you hold those vows, and you might frequently forget that you have them and what are entailed in holding them purely. We have 18 root downfalls that we want to refrain from, but there are these 46 secondary vows. And among the 46, they're divided into 7 groups, the 6 perfections, and then the last group is about benefiting all sentient beings through our actions being dedicated to their welfare. So there are one for each of these perfections, one set. And the set for patience are 4 of the secondary vows. They're numbers 17 through 20. So let's go through those briefly because it's important for those of you who hold them to have the awareness of what they are so you don't transgress them. Transgressing the secondary bodhisattva vows isn't as bad as transgressing or having a root downfall. To do a root downfall means that you would break the vows from their root and you would no longer hold them. But a secondary transgression is still very, very serious stuff. It's something we want to avoid as much as possible. And having the awareness of these is the first step. So that's why I present them. And even those of you who don't have bodhisattva vows, this is a good study. You can study these vows and become familiar with them so that then you can feel comfortable taking them eventually. So let's take a look at those. Number 17, becoming angry and retaliating with your body, speech, or mind. These are what we often again call the 3 doors, the 3 ways in which our behavior manifests. When you are 1, insulted or blamed, 2, beaten, 3, the object of somebody's anger, or 4, when your shortcomings are exposed to others. So the first one might be, again, when we have that sort of mental harm to ourselves by the words that other people are saying to us, insulting us, blaming us, saying negative things towards us. That's the receiving kind of their verbal abuse. The second one is when we receive physical abuse, when we're beaten or physically harmed in some way. And I would say that would even include if they do things that harm our possessions. Somebody keys our car or something like that. The third would be the object of when we are the object of someone's anger, when they are angry and upset at us and we are having to be on the receiving end of that. Or when our own shortcomings are exposed to others, when they humiliate us, bring up our weaknesses, our faults in the midst of others. That can be a very challenging thing for many of us, right? To have our faults exposed. So Lama Tsongkhapa actually calls these 4 the 4 qualities of a religious person when we are able to be patient in the midst of those. So this is the fault of being without these 4 qualities. To be patient and calm when we're insulted or blamed, to be patient when we're beaten, when we're the object of somebody's anger, when our shortcomings are exposed to others. So in essence, he's saying that to be a good practitioner of the Dharma, he calls it a religious person in that translation, it means we have to be willing to be patient in all 4 of those situations. That's hard, right? This secondary vow, sometimes these secondary vows are pretty difficult for us to accomplish, right? Because we're talking about here all 3 doors. Maybe curtailing from doing something physically isn't that difficult for some of us now. I mean, hopefully we've gotten a bit more control over our physical actions. We're not going to go, if somebody throws something at us, we're not going to pick up something and throw it at them. That's not something we're maybe as inclined to do. But verbally, it's very easy to suddenly open the mouth, and we've got all kinds of stuff coming out when other people insult us or what have you. We start insulting them back. We start saying negative things about them, or they point out our faults and we start pointing out theirs. That's a little bit easier to do. Thoughts, though, that's the 3rd door, right? Body, speech, and mind. Thoughts are really hard to control. That's why in that prayer we say at the beginning of class, we talk about do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. That's the hardest of these 3. That's kind of the greater level practice that we may not all be completely able to do yet. How do we stop those thoughts of anger at those times when these 4 things are happening to us? People accosting us verbally, physically, they're angry at us for some reason, for something we've done or they think we've done, and they point out our faults. So a truly spiritual, religious person, somebody who is actually taking the Dharma to heart, would not have any angry thoughts, angry words, angry actions on the basis of this particular situation occurring. So again, we have to develop some skills to be able to practice that way. That's why we went through all of this about how we generate patience on the basis of certain attitudes, bringing to mind certain things that allow us to then reframe what we're experiencing. It's all part and parcel of the same thing. This is how we actually practice patience. It's not something that you can flip a switch and immediately be patient with all of these various things that others do to us. Rather, we have to develop the skills and the ability to do that. So again, if you do find yourself breaking that at times, then you can purify. Purification is there for any of our faults, but it's always best if we can do what we can to refrain from engaging in these actions. So again, this is always something we're going to do with some level of affliction. So we are definitely going to accumulate some non-virtue when we have a breaking of this particular secondary vow. So again, don't need to say maybe much more about that because that one again is pretty straightforward, as are I think all of these with regard to patience. Number 18. This number 18 and 19 actually have more to do with the continuity of belligerence or that first in regard to someone who's angry with you. We have that in our lives frequently, right? We do or say something that they take offense at, and suddenly, they get really angry at us. Well, if we reject that person, as it says here, through harmful intent, anger, or just laziness, we ignore that angry person. And we don't try to relieve the situation that made him or her angry by explaining why we acted, or trying to pacify them, trying to apologize to them. If we don't make some effort to heal the situation, we're breaking this secondary transgression. And, again, I guess we have to look at the idea that there is time involved in this. It would be ideal if we could do this much more quickly so that the person doesn't stew in their anger. Every moment that they spend in anger towards us is not a healthy moment for them, right? It's only exacerbating their own anger. If we don't try to resolve situations as quickly as possible, then we're allowing that person to create harm for themselves to some degree. Again, not that necessarily, I'm not saying we have complete control over that other person's mind, because we could go and apologize to them. We could go to them and explain why we did what we did, and they may still have anger towards us, right? There's no guarantee that what we do from our side is going to heal the situation, but at least we've made an effort to diminish their anger, to stop their belligerence or whatever is building in them that's going to potentially cause them even greater harm. Again, the Bodhisattva's motivation isn't just that I don't want these thoughts of anger in myself. It's that I also don't want to see other people stew in their anger. Why would we? Why would we take any delight in people continuing to go around with their, red face and fuming at everybody around them and potentially causing harm to other innocent beings who weren't even involved in that situation? You have a lot of harm that can come about by people being controlled by anger in this world. So this is us acknowledging that we have to take that step to be attentive to the anger of others and do what we can when, especially if that's directed at us. Now, there is one commentary that I looked at earlier on preparing for this. It said that this is even if you see situations where somebody's angry at someone else. Now, again, that may start to look like we're meddling, and if you got your sister mad at your brother or something, and you want to make sure that your sister doesn't stew in her anger and even have greater harm to herself, if you feel like there's a closeness in that relationship that allows you to do that, then by all means it'd be best to do what you can to intervene, to try to allow people to explain why they did what they did, try to heal that over, to encourage some form of apology and forgiveness to occur. But sometimes we can't do that with everybody in the world. Certainly people who we don't know and don't have a direct connection with, it would be very hard. If some people were getting angry and upset at each other in a grocery store, and you didn't even know them, and you just walked up to them and started to resolve their situation for them, you might end up being the object of their anger. So I think we have to be very careful about this idea of this doesn't necessarily apply across the board, but certainly when it's directed at us, when we know that we're a party involved in this, that something we did or said has caused this person to have thoughts of anger towards us, well, then we have to take responsibility for that. even if we meant no ill will through what we did. That's why it said we at least have to explain why we said what we did, why we did what we did. Then at least the person is clear and they can make their own choice about whether they want to further their thoughts of anger or not. But that's an important part of it. So again, this one is, I think, pretty straightforward after going through that initial explanation of how it applies. As I said, if it does apply in cases where we see other people who are, having anger directed at them, if we feel that it's appropriate and can use skillful means to help the people involved, by all means, get involved and try to help them to have some reconciliation, some ability to sit down and, talk about what happened and why they just said what they did or whatever the case might be. Number 19 is similar to some degree to the third root downfall, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment. But it says here, refusing to accept the sincere apologies of others out of anger or laziness. Becomes a little less afflicted when it's laziness, but sometimes we might be angry because other people have harmed us, and now they're coming to us and they're apologizing. So someone who is in that position, if we decide that we are not going to accept their apology, instead we are going to reject that, well then that's breaking this vow. That's not a very good behavior to be in, right? To not accept someone's apologies. Now there are oftentimes given these little caveats, these exceptions. If the person comes to you and their apology isn't really sincere and you can tell that that they didn't really think it through, they're not really feeling bad about what they did, and they would probably do it again, well then we might be able to reject that because it's not sincere, but also reject it because we think that it's important that the person learn that they need to actually do a deeper investigation before they apologize, that they actually see why it is that they feel bad about what they did and feel that they would again come to that place where they would never do that again, where they would reject doing that behavior in the future. It is important for people to have sincere apologies. There's actually a really interesting book. We don't talk. We talk about forgiveness, as I mentioned last week. Not that we talk about here and there in Buddhism, but not that much. And we really should talk about forgiveness a lot more. But apologizing, we talk about even less, right? Who talks about how to give a healthy apology for something? There's actually a really interesting book called On Apology that you might take a look at. It's not written from a Buddhist perspective, but it goes into the worldly ways of dealing with apology and what is really expected on the part of someone who's being apologized to. And it's not to say that we have to have all those things lined up before we accept an apology, but it does inform a lot of what we're talking about here. Because if people aren't genuinely apologetic, they haven't been sincere in getting to that place, it might behoove them to actually spend more time before they apologize to us, to do that deeper work, so that they then understand the ramifications. In our culture, people say, I'm sorry a lot without necessarily meaning it, right? They say, oh, I'm sorry. But, it's not an ownership of what they did as a fault. They just want to calm the other person down, perhaps. They don't really feel this deeper motivation to apologize. So we do have to do some investigation into this. It's not to say that an outright rejection of an apology is falling into this category. It's when that apology is coming out of, again, anger or laziness, when we are angry and upset at the person and we're not going to accept the apology because we're still stewing in our own stuff. Well, that's not a healthy place for us to be, and it's not good for us to then reject their apology if it is sincere and heartfelt. So again, this is the nature of this secondary transgression that we want to avoid, is to recognize that we should generally be quite happy to receive the apologies of others. As we talked about a little bit last week with forgiveness, we should even be willing to forgive others without apologies. I know that's a tricky one, because if somebody hasn't apologized for what they did, to go and forgive them for it might seem like you're opening the door in harmful ways, but nonetheless, I think it is important that we at least generate that forgiveness in our heart. This particular secondary downfall does differ from the third root vow. The third root vow I put on the screen, it is not forgiving others, but harboring a grudge and holding it even when they apologize. So it sounds very similar, right? And why is it different? Because the four conditions are not needed to transgress it. I haven't talked about these four conditions before, I don't believe, because the four conditions are not necessary to break a secondary vow, to have a secondary transgression, but they are required for 16 of the 18 root downfalls. So this one is one of them it's required for. What are the four conditions? The four conditions is that when you reject this apology and not forgive, you hold your grudge against somebody, you first of all fail to regard that as wrong. So you think it's perfectly right and you're perfectly justified in harboring that grudge. That's the first one that has to be there. And all four have to be there for the root downfall to occur. The second is not abandoning the thought to do the action again. In other words, you would happily, hold the grudge against them in another similar situation. You would not think that there's anything wrong with that so that you would refrain from doing it again. The third is rejoicing or admiring yourself for having done it, really actually taking delight. Oh, I'm getting them. I'm going to keep holding on to this grudge, even though they've come to me and said they're sorry because they harmed me so badly. I'm going to just, give it to them, be happy at that, being, rejoicing. The fourth is having neither of these two factors that are a part of our curtailing our misbehavior. The first one we sometimes call shame, which is what's on the screen because this is what FPMT has in their publications. I like to call it sometimes self-respect. It means that we don't have enough respect for ourselves that we would refrain from doing that. In other words, we think we want to uphold ourselves to a higher standard of behavior. Consideration for others, sometimes that's called embarrassment, which is not a term I really like a lot, but consideration for others means that we also have to think about the effect that our engaging in that rejection of an apology and holding a grudge, the effect it might have on others in our Buddhist community, our teachers, or even in other people that aren't involved in that to that degree, but people who would have some negative ramifications from us engaging in that behavior. So if you have all four of those present, which is hard for us, this is why we study the vows, right? So we know it's wrong. We don't even have the first condition then with regard to the 18 or 16 of the 18 root downfalls. If we know right from the beginning that what we're doing is wrong, well, then hopefully it stops us from doing it. But at least we have that awareness and we don't have a breaking of our root vow. In the case of the secondary transgression, though, if you refuse to accept the apologies of others out of anger or laziness, then this would be more specifically one that you don't need those conditions for. You may even see it as wrong. You may even not want to do it again, or um, not have any rejoicing or admiring for having done it. Maybe even having some shame, some consideration. But you still, would be breaking that vow, having that secondary transgression because those four conditions are not necessary. Is that clear? Again, I haven't introduced these four conditions, I don't think, because they're mostly about the root vows. The root vows, you have to have all four present in order for you to have a breaking of that vow. And so again, it's good to study the vows. That's why we're doing this investigation of these secondary ones, but it's good to go through the entire list of all 18 root transgressions, especially because those are very important that we refrain from. Any questions or comments? Okay, then let's carry on. I've got one more secondary transgression. And again, I like going through these, again, even for those that don't have the vows, it's useful to just be reminded about what is all entailed in our behavior. It's not just when somebody's harming us, but when somebody even comes to us and apologizes. If we still have this angry mind towards them, then we're not being patient at that time either. The 20th is following your anger and not trying to abandon it, feeding your anger by thinking that you acted rightly. Instead, you should contemplate the disadvantages of anger or apply other antidotes. This is the whole point of this course, was again to give you a whole tool belt, like a utility belt of all these various things that you can pull out and practice at various times. When the thoughts of anger begin to arise on the basis of suffering you're experiencing or harm that others are causing you, or just your frustration at trying to gain some conviction around the Dharma, whatever the situation is, we should be not following that anger, not allowing it to continue to reside in our minds, feed it, Instead, we should contemplate its disadvantages, and we should go on to think about all the things that we covered in this course, all the various antidotes. If we don't do that, then essentially we're missing the core part of our practice, as I mentioned earlier. This is what Lama Zopa Rinpoche, as I said, always emphasizes, that the essence of our practice is to be attentive to our minds and to keep the negative thoughts and actions from arising, and keep those that are positive and more constructive and virtuous arising and being present in our minds. And this is actually how we antidote things, is that an antidote generally has a more virtuous, truthful quality to it, whereas the affliction that we're trying to combat has a delusional quality to it. It's not seeing things correctly, and it's disturbing our minds. It's non-virtuous. It's going to lead us down a pathway where we're not going to be having good results from that. So this is the way that we work with our minds all the time. There's that wonderful quote that I think I saw in Geshe Sopa's second volume, the one that's mostly on karma, where he says, quotes Geshe Ben Kongyo, this wonderful mind training Lojong practitioner, who says, standing at the door of the afflictions, holding the spear of the antidote. Other than this, I have no other job. Like, this is really our job. This is your Buddhist job 24/7, is to stand at the door of the afflictions, where the afflictions are going to come in, holding the spear of the antidotes, ready to, like, there's a lot of war analogies in some of these Buddhist teachings, which is kind of interesting, but it's what we're doing. We're fighting a war with our own crazy minds, our crazy roommates, these mind states that we want to combat. Well, you're standing there with the spear of the antidotes, ready to immediately get that mind of anger when it comes in the door, even approaches the door. You want to do what you can to undo it, to not cause it to arise. And by developing some skill with this over time, by practicing all these various ways that we've talked about throughout this investigation of patience, you should be able to do that over time. You'll have, like I said, a utility belt. You go, oh, this is some suffering coming into my life. Let's think about renunciation. Rather than getting angry and upset, I'm going to think about how this is evidence of samsara, and I need to turn away from samsara and develop the mind that wishes to achieve liberation. I'm going to funnel it there. I'm going to take what is potentially going to cause my mind of anger to arise and make it into something beautiful that helps me to progress on the path. Or when that person's coming at you with, some angry thoughts and a red face, and it's obvious they're going to just scream at you and say all sorts of things, prepare your mind by saying, okay, this is a suffering sentient being who's under the control of their own delusions. I should have compassion for them, and I should really see them through that lens, rather than what my habitual mind says, which is I should get red-faced right back at them, get angry and upset at what they're doing. This is how we change our minds, is by actually applying these antidotes. So this 20th secondary transgression is saying, when we do the opposite, when we allow our mind of anger to just increase and develop, we just keep feeding it. Now, they do say that it is no transgression if you make a concerted effort and you're not able to do so yet, because obviously we're not perfect from the get-go, right? That's why we have this whole class and this investigation, is so that we can develop more skills with regard to this. So if you make an effort, if you actually, at that time when that red-faced person is coming at you and ready to scream and yell at you for something you did or didn't do, if you are able to prepare your mind, but you still have your own angry thoughts, or your own anger manifesting in some speech, but you tried your best, you just didn't get there, well, then there's no breaking of this secondary transgression, because you tried. You applied the antidote to the best of your ability. Now, it can be a learning opportunity to say, wow, I need to work harder then. I need to be really in a much better place, so that when I encounter these, one-off types of incidents in the world at large, that I'm going to be much better prepared the next time, so that I can actually be successful in not allowing my thoughts of anger to develop. And then, of course, the speech and the physical actions that might potentially follow from that. So this is how we change our minds. And so number 20 was really highlighting when we're not doing that, but not when we're not trying. Because if you're trying, you're doing it. Because trying is good enough in many cases, and we want to keep trying until we are successful, obviously. But the trying is how we get there. Otherwise, it's hopeless. If we have to already be there, well, then we're never going to get there. I think I'll share. I've shared this before, but I think it's always kind of a fun example, because it's somebody that I worked with for a while in regard to that person's anger, and I got permission to share this with general public, so it's not something that somebody shared in confidence that I can't share with anyone else. I generally, will share everything confidentially if people do talk to me about things going on in their practice or what have you. But this person was out at community college here in Santa Fe, and there's one of those roundabouts. You guys have them in Taos too, and where they put them in Santa Fe, and of course, a lot of people don't even know how to deal with them. You come up to them and you don't, oh my God, what do I do here? But in Europe, they're all over the place. But so I saw them a lot over there. But anyway, this person was leaving community college and came to the first roundabout, or one of the roundabouts, and stopped. And there was another car coming around that he had probably plenty of time to get in before them, but decided to wait. And while he was waiting, the car behind him that came and wanted him to go and started honking the horn and screaming and yelling. And he's got that red-faced person behind him. And so he looks in the rearview mirror and goes like this, getting ready to extend his middle finger, but he stops. And when I met with this person, I said, and they shared this story, I said, congratulations, that's great. You kept yourself from getting your middle finger up. All the thoughts were there. All of it was being generated because he got his hand up and he was ready to do it, to flip off the guy behind him, but he didn't. That's success. That's trying. That's effort. That's what it means to practice patience. And eventually over time, if the hand won't go up, and over time, then the thoughts won't even happen. And over time, be completely at peace and maybe sending compassionate thoughts, practicing Tonglen with the person behind him, whatever. There'll be all this different practice, but you don't get there immediately. You have to start where you are and have to try to interrupt it wherever you can. And the fact that he was able to interrupt it right there before the finger got extended was amazing, wonderful. So this is how I think we all have to practice, is we just do the best that we can to keep moving in that direction. So again, this secondary transgression number 20 was when you don't do that at all. You just simply allow the thoughts of anger to be there, and maybe you even feed them by thinking how justified you were at being angry and upset at this person for what they did, for their belligerence, their horrible actions and words or whatever. Okay, so we got about 5-6 minutes to see if there are any questions, and then we'll go into joyous effort in the next class, which is what I was kind of anticipating. Kind of hard to complete patience and go on to another perfection in one class. So any comments or questions from anybody? Was there anything in the chat box?
No, I don't see anything, Gen Don.
Okay. Anyone have anything that you'd like to share? Another story like that where you refrained from? I mean, I really like that story, and to me that was it was reassuring. And of course, when you're somebody that's trying to help somebody work with their anger, and you see that they get to that point where they've at least caught it somewhere in the process. Because oftentimes my own experience around working with anger, since nobody's asking any questions, I'm just going to keep going on, but my own experience of initially working with anger was in San Francisco when I first met the Dharma, and I was driving on the freeways in San Francisco in the Bay Area, and it's even worse now. I mean, I thought it was bad then. It's really bad now. I don't know how bad it is with the pandemic, but I'm just saying in terms of over time, and with more and more people in the Bay Area, it gets to be a crazier and crazier place to drive. And so I would find myself only recognizing my anger after I'd already gotten upset at people, after I'd already honked my horn and flipped them off or done whatever. You guys might not think that that's what I used to do, but that's what I used to do. Like many people, I mean, that was how I was out surviving as a road warrior. It was just kind of being out there and doing all the same stuff that everybody else does. So if you even notice it after the fact, that's already an amazing accomplishment. Congratulations. You're seeing that your anger arose and that you weren't able to deal with it. Well, that's great. Rather than just going on to the next thing, rather than continuing to just neglect it, at least you're attentive to it. At least you're now aware that it's arising. Then you can begin to apply antidotes and pull it back further and further, further and further, till you get to a place, hopefully, I don't know that I'm there yet, where anger doesn't arise at all. I mean, I do find that in some situations it doesn't arise, but we still are tested at times, right? Things happen and we go, yeah, there it comes, you know. It's quite natural. It's an impulse. It's something that we have that's an ingrained reaction, but it's not cast in stone. It can be changed. The miracle of the mind. So, all right. Any other comments, questions? So I hope that this investigation into patience has been useful. I mean, I could spend many, many more sessions talking about patience, I'm sure, and all the different ways to combat anger. But again, in the context of the Bodhisattva's practice, we see, I mentioned this at the motivation last week, how our anger towards others is one of the main obstacles we have to overcome. How can we possibly be dedicated to the welfare of all beings if we hold some of them with the mind of anger? If we resent them, if we have a desire to retaliate against them, if we are vengeful towards them, you know, this is not a way to live our lives and to think, oh, we're practicing the Bodhisattva path. If we really want to be dedicated to the welfare of others, we have to hold all beings within the sphere of patience and understand them through this lens. So, all right, let's do some prayers then. So Mary, I'll get those on the screen and we'll recite these wonderful verses from Master Shantideva that are about taking that level of motivation to dedicating for the welfare of all beings and trying to include in our thoughts as we recite these words, even those beings that we find challenging, as we did in the motivation today, thinking about them especially as the object of our dedication, because they also are the object of our practice of patience. So you might even bring to mind those beings that you're holding in your heart right now before we recite these verses together. Individuals who are experiencing obstacles, illness, who are dying or who have died. But as I said, try to encompass all beings within the scope of this prayer so that we dedicate for the welfare of each and every one of them, even those most difficult people in our lives. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness, and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. And then this final verse that encompasses this far-reaching attitude that we're trying to cultivate through all these perfections. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. Then we recite some prayers for our wonderful teachers. We are so blessed and we can feel such gratitude, as we did in the meditation this morning, for having these teachers in our lives and a wish for them to continue to abide, to alleviate the suffering of both ourselves and others. So let's recite these prayers for His Holiness Lama Zopa and then Osohita, Lama Yeshe's reincarnation, but extend the thoughts to all spiritual guides. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. And then Osohita. Venerable One, to you whose kindness exceeds that of all the conquerors, for those wanderers in far-off places, especially the West, mindful of your loving concern for us in intentionally descending again into a family of a far distant land, we make this request. O Lama, please, please live long. Okay, so again, do your best over the next week to practice with these teachings, any of these around patience. Know that the handout for joyous effort, the little chart that I put together for each of these perfections, is out on the Dropbox page as well. Mary put that out there for me. So know that you can download that if you wish before next week's class. So you can have that as a guide and make notes on it or what have you. But I look forward to seeing you all, maybe throughout the week, but certainly next Sunday. If everything goes as we think it's going to go, we'll all still be here. So, all right. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate everyone being here today. And yeah, stay safe and healthy.
You too. Thank